The house on Maple Street had always felt like home to Emma. But on the night she discovered the email, it became something else. A crime scene. Not in the literal sense. There was no blood, no weapon, no shattered glass, just words, damning and inescapable, glowing from the screen of Daniel's laptop. Words from another woman, intimate and familiar, the kind Emma had once believed were meant only for her. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. Then, as if on autopilot, she copied the emails to her phone and closed the laptop. Daniel was in the shower, oblivious. She had minutes, maybe seconds, before he returned. Before she had to decide whether to confront him immediately or let the truth fester inside her. She chose silence. Not because she wasn't furious, but because she needed time to think. Betrayal was not a wound that could be sutured with a single scream. It required strategy. Daniel emerged from the bathroom, toweling his hair dry. "Hey, Em," he said, his voice warm, familiar. A lie. She turned, forcing a smile. "Hey." He kissed her cheek, and she barely resisted the urge to recoil. How many times had he kissed her with the taste of another woman still on his lips? For days, Emma played the role of the unsuspecting wife, all while peeling back the layers of Daniel's deception. She read through months of messages, uncovered dinner reservations, hotel receipts buried in their shared credit card statements. The woman's name was Ava Carter, and according to Daniel's messages, she was more than a fling. "I feel alive with you," he had written. "You remind me of who I used to be." Emma could have confronted him at any point, could have thrown his laptop at the wall and screamed until her throat bled, but she wasn't sure if she wanted revenge or something more complicated, understanding. Instead, she took a different approach. One evening, she told Daniel she was meeting an old college friend for dinner. Instead, she followed him. He didn't go to Ava's house, but to a quiet bar on the edge of town. And there, to her surprise, he met someone else, a man. Her breath caught. This wasn't just about Ava. The conversation between the two men was hushed, but Emma, seated a few tables away, picked up enough. Ava wasn't a lover. She was a cover. The real betrayal ran deeper. Daniel had secrets buried beneath secrets, and for the first time, Emma felt something besides rage. She felt fear. The next morning, she left the printouts of the emails on the kitchen counter. Alongside them, she placed the photos she had taken of Daniel at the bar. No words, no accusations, just proof. Then she waited. When Daniel came home and saw them, his face drained of color. For a long moment, he said nothing, just exhaled slowly and ran a hand through his hair. "Emma," he finally said, his voice rough. "This isn't what you think. She..." laughed, bitter and raw. "Then tell me what it is, Daniel, because I think I married a man I don't even know." He swallowed hard, eyes darting between the evidence. "I never meant to hurt you." That's not an answer. For the first time in days, she saw something real in his face. Not deception, not indifference, but despair. The kind that comes when a carefully built life is on the verge of collapse. She wasn't sure whether she wanted to hear the truth or walk away before he could speak it. Because once he did, she wouldn't be able to unhear it. And then, she would have to decide whether to leave, forgive, or do something far more dangerous, stay and uncover every last lie. The choice loomed before her, as heavy as the silence between them. Emma's heart pounded as she watched Daniel hesitate. His mouth opened, then closed, as if he was weighing the cost of his words. She had seen him do this before, in job interviews, during fights with his brother, in moments when the truth had too many sharp edges. But this was different. This wasn't about smoothing things over. This was about exposing the cracks in their life, in their marriage, in him. I need you to listen, he finally said. Really listen. She folded her arms. I've been listening, Daniel. To your emails, your texts, your lies. I want something different now. I want the truth. He exhaled slowly, rubbing his face with both hands before looking up at her. It's not what you think, he repeated, but there was less defense in his voice now, more resignation. Ava, she's not what you think. Emma's jaw clenched. Then tell me what she is. Daniel hesitated again, then pulled out a chair and sat down, as if his legs could no longer hold him. I owed someone a favor, a serious favor. I never cheated on you, Emma. I needed you to believe I did, because the truth is worse. Her stomach twisted. Worse? Daniel nodded. Ava works for someone dangerous, someone I was involved with before we were married. He came looking for me, and I had to make it seem like my secret was an affair. It was the only way to keep you out of it. Emma stared at him. And what, exactly, are you involved in? Silence stretched between them. He didn't look away. Things I never wanted you to know about. A slow, creeping dread settled over her. She had been bracing for heartbreak, for betrayal. But this was something else. Something dark, something that made her wonder if the man she married had ever been real at all. She took a step back. I don't know if I can do this. Daniel flinched, but nodded. I get that. Emma's hand hovered near the printouts, on the table. The evidence she thought had given her clarity now only deepened the mystery. So what now? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He looked at her, his expression unreadable. That depends. Do you want to know the whole truth? Or do you want to walk away while you still can? The room felt colder, the walls pressing in. She had spent days preparing to leave him, but now she wasn't sure if she was walking away from a broken marriage or stepping into something far more dangerous, and worst of all, she didn't know which terrified her more. Emma's pulse roared in her ears. She had come into this confrontation expecting tears, rage, maybe even an argument that would end with her throwing her wedding ring on the table. Instead, she was staring into the eyes of a man she no longer recognized, debating whether she wanted to open a door she could never close again. She could leave, pack a bag, walk out, pretend she never saw the emails, never followed him to that bar, never learned the truth, or whatever sliver of it he was willing to give her. But she wasn't sure if she could live with that. Tell me everything, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. And if you lied to me again, even once, I walk. Daniel hesitated just long enough to make her wonder if he was calculating how much truth to give her. Then he nodded. Okay. He gestured toward the chairs at the kitchen table, but she stayed standing. He ran a hand through his hair, then looked up at her. You remember when I left Markson & Co.? Of course she did. His sudden departure from the corporate law firm had been abrupt, almost suspicious. But he'd told her it was burnout, that he was tired of the long hours, the moral gray areas, that he wanted to do something that actually mattered. You said, you were done with corporate law. I was. But I wasn't just dealing with corporations. I had a client, a businessman. That's how he introduced himself, at least. In reality, he was running a money laundering operation, and he swallowed. I helped clean up some of his messes. Emma's throat went dry. Jesus, Daniel. I didn't know what I was getting into at first, he said quickly. By the time I figured it out, I was in too deep. She shook her head. And, Ava? She works for him, or at least she used to. She's been trying to get out. When he came looking for me, she reached out. Said she had information on him, real evidence, but she needed help disappearing. Emma let out a short, bitter laugh. So instead of telling me any of this, you decided to make it look like you were cheating on me? I thought it would protect you, she scoffed. Do I look protected to you? He had the nerve to look guilty. I know it was wrong, but you have no idea who this man is, what he's capable of. A heavy silence stretched between them. Emma had come into this night thinking she had one kind of decision to make. Now she had another. You still have a choice, Daniel said. You can leave. Pretend you never knew any of this. I'll figure it out on my own. She should. Every instinct in her body told her to run, to pack a bag and never look back. But something in Daniel's face, something raw, something desperate, held her in place. Tell me one thing, she said. Do you still love me? Or did you kill that when you decided to lie to me? His eyes darkened, and when he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. Emma, I have never stopped loving you. Even when I was breaking us. Her breath hitched, and she hated herself for believing him, even for a second. She turned toward the staircase, toward their bedroom, toward the life she wasn't sure still existed. I need time to think. Daniel nodded. I understand. But as she walked away, she knew one thing for certain. Whatever she chose next, nothing would ever be the same again. Emma barely slept that night. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to Daniel's breathing on the other side of the mattress. He hadn't tried to touch her, hadn't even reached for her, as if sensing that any move in her direction might shatter what little control she had left. Her mind spun with everything he had told her, and worse, everything he hadn't. His words had been careful, measured. There were still holes in his story, and she wasn't sure if that was because he didn't trust her with the full truth, or because he knew that the full truth might send her running for good. By the time the first streaks of dawn crept through the blinds, Emma had made a decision. She slipped out of bed, careful not to wake him, and padded into the bathroom. Her reflection in the mirror startled her, dark circles beneath her eyes, face drawn and pale. She barely recognized herself, but then again, she barely recognized her life. She pulled on a sweatshirt and jeans, grabbed her keys, and left the house before she could change her mind. The coffee shop was nearly empty, save for an older couple in the corner and a man reading a newspaper near the window. Emma wrapped her hands around her cup, the warmth grounding her, and waited. 10 minutes later, Ava Carter slid into the seat across from her. For someone whose name had haunted Emma for days, she was surprisingly unremarkable. Shoulder length, brown hair, dark green eyes, the kind of beauty that wasn't striking so much as quietly confident. She wore a fitted leather jacket over a plain black top, her movements careful, measured, like someone always aware of their surroundings. You must be Emma, Ava said, studying her. Emma didn't bother with pleasantries. I need to know the truth. Ava smirked slightly, as if she had been expecting that. And what makes you think your husband gave it to you? Emma's grip tightened around her cup. Because I don't think he trusts me as much as he says he does. But he was willing to risk everything for you. So tell me, why? Ava leaned back, considering her. Daniel's a good man, she said finally. Emma let out a sharp laugh. That's debatable. Ava shook her head. No, it's not. I've met men who would sell out their families for half of what he did. Daniel may have lied to you, but he was trying to protect you. Emma exhaled, frustrated. That's what he keeps saying. But protect me from what? Who is this man he's afraid of? Ava hesitated. Then, in a quiet voice, she said, His name is Victor Rains. The name meant nothing to Emma, but the way Ava's expression darkened sent a chill down her spine. He owns people, Ava continued. Not in the literal sense, but in every way that matters. He doesn't just deal in money. He deals in power, information, leverage. And once you owe him, he never lets you go. Emma swallowed hard. And Daniel owed him? Ava nodded. Years ago, and now Victor wants something again. That's why I came to him. Because I know too much, and that makes me a problem. Emma's mind raced. So what happens now? Ava exhaled, glancing toward the window as if expecting someone to be watching. That depends on Daniel, and on you. Emma's pulse pounded. What do you mean? Ava met her eyes. I mean, you're already in this, whether you like it or not. The question is, are you going to help Daniel get out, or are you going to walk away? Emma's breath caught. She had spent days preparing to leave him, to end their marriage over a betrayal she thought she understood. But this was something else, something bigger, more dangerous. For the first time, she wondered if leaving Daniel was even an option at all, and worse, if she even wanted to. Emma's fingers curled around the edge of the table, her pulse quickening. The choice Ava presented wasn't as simple as staying or leaving. It was about survival. Why should I trust you? Emma asked, keeping her voice steady. Ava smirked, but there was no amusement in her eyes. You shouldn't. But you should trust what you already know. Your husband is in deeper than he's admitted, and if you don't start making decisions now, someone else will make them for you. Emma swallowed hard, the weight of the situation pressing down on her. What does Victor want from Daniel? Ava hesitated, scanning the coffee shop like she was expecting someone to appear out of thin air. Then she leaned forward, lowering her voice. Victor doesn't just want Daniel. He wants you too. A cold wave of dread washed over Emma. What do you mean? Ava exhaled, glancing at the table as if deciding how much to say. Victor doesn't just control people through money. He controls them through fear, through leverage. Daniel tried to cut ties with him, and Victor let him think he had. But that was a lie. He's been watching. He knows who Daniel cares about. Ava's gaze sharpened. And that means you. Emma's breath hitched. He thinks he can use me to get to Daniel? Ava nodded. Or worse, a chill ran down Emma's spine. She had been so focused on Daniel's betrayal, on the lies, on the marriage she thought was falling apart, that she hadn't even considered the possibility that she was now a target. She felt sick. I need to talk to Daniel, she muttered, pushing back her chair. Ava reached across the table, grabbing her wrist before she could stand. Be careful. If Victor knows you're asking questions, he'll see you as a liability. Emma pulled her arm free, staring at Ava. Then maybe it's time we make him think I'm something else. Ava's brow furrowed. What are you saying? Emma took a steady breath, standing up. I'm saying that if Victor Raines wants to play a game, then it's time we stop being his pawns. By the time Emma returned home, Daniel was already waiting for her. He was sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the pile of evidence she had left out the night before. The emails, the photos, proof of everything. His hands were steepled together, tension rolling off him in waves. When she stepped inside, he looked up, his expression wary. Where were you? Emma tossed her keys on the counter. With Ava. His jaw tightened. Emma, you don't get to be mad, she interrupted, her voice cold. You don't get to act like I'm the one who betrayed you. Daniel exhaled, running a hand through his hair. I never wanted you involved in this. Well, guess what? I am. She took a step closer. And now I need you to be honest with me. Completely honest. Because I know about Victor Raines, and I know he's watching us. So tell me, Daniel, how bad is it? His shoulders sagged, like a man finally realizing he had lost control. It's worse than you think, he admitted quietly. Emma clenched her fists. Then you'd better start talking. Daniel met her eyes, and for the first time in days, she saw something she hadn't expected. Not guilt, not fear, but resolve, and that terrified her more than anything. Daniel leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping against the table. For a long moment, he didn't say anything. Then finally, he spoke. I was 25 when I met Victor Raines, he said, his voice hollow. Fresh out of law school, hungry to prove myself. Markson & Co. assigned me to a client I wasn't supposed to ask too many questions about. Victor liked it that way. Young lawyers with ambition, ones who wouldn't push back. By the time I realized who he really was, I was already in too deep. Emma. Stayed silent, letting him talk. I started by handling small legal matters for him. Contracts, business acquisitions, keeping his paper trail clean. But eventually it turned into something else. I wasn't just fixing legal loopholes. I was burying things, people. His voice wavered. I never killed anyone, Emma, but I made things disappear. Money, evidence, threats. Emma swallowed hard, nausea rolling in her stomach. Why didn't you walk away? Daniel let out a bitter laugh. You don't walk away from Victor Raines. You either stay useful or you become a liability. I spent years being useful. His hands clenched into fists. Then I met you, and for the first time I had something to lose. Emma's breath caught. I wanted out, Daniel continued. So I did the one thing I never should have done. I stole from him. Her heart slammed against her ribs. What? A file, he admitted. Not money, not accounts, information, proof of everything he's done, names, transactions, bodies. I thought, if I had leverage, I could disappear, take you with me, and we could build a real life. I left Markson & Co., I cut ties, and for a while, I thought I'd won. But Victor let me believe that because he was waiting, watching, and now he's ready to collect. Emma felt lightheaded. And Ava? She was his fixer, Daniel said, the one who made sure people like me stayed in line. But she wanted out too. She came to me because she knew about the file. She thought if we worked together, we could bring him down. Emma's mind raced. And now? Daniel exhaled. Now Victor knows I still have it. And he knows that you know too. The air in the room turned thick, suffocating. Emma had thought the worst of this nightmare had been Daniel's betrayal. But now she saw it for what it was. This wasn't just about a broken marriage. It was about survival. Her voice was barely above a whisper. So what do we do? Daniel hesitated, then stood up. When he spoke again, his voice was steady. We run. Emma's pulse spiked. Run? It's the only way, he said. Victor won't stop. He won't forgive. The only way we survive this is if we disappear before he makes a move. Emma stared at him, the weight of his words pressing down on her. Leaving meant abandoning everything. Their home, their friends, their lives. But staying meant death. She should have been terrified. She should have been screaming. Instead, she looked Daniel in the eye and made the only choice that mattered. Then let's go. Daniel's eyes flickered with something unreadable, relief maybe, or regret, but he didn't waste time questioning her decision. He just nodded. We don't have long, he said, already moving. Victor won't give us a second chance. Emma felt like she was standing on the edge of a cliff, looking down at the life she was about to leave behind. The walls of their home, once filled with love, laughter, and the quiet moments of marriage, now felt like a prison closing in. How do we do this? She asked, her voice steadier than she felt. Daniel grabbed a duffel bag from the hall closet and started shoving clothes inside. We pack light. Essentials only. No credit cards, no phones, nothing traceable. Emma's breath hitched. We just vanish? It's the only way, he repeated, his voice tight. We'll head south, take cash, find a safe house. A loud knock. At the front door, cut through the air like a gunshot. Emma froze. Daniel's eyes darkened. He put a finger to his lips, signaling silence. The knock came again, louder this time. Emma's heartbeat thundered. Who is it? She whispered. Daniel grabbed, her wrist pulling her toward the back of the house. We don't wait to find out. They barely made it to the kitchen when a deep, controlled voice echoed from the other side of the door. Daniel! Emma! Open up! The blood drained from Emma's face. Daniel cursed under his breath. It's him! Victor Raines, the man who never let anyone go. The man who had been watching them all along. Emma's fingers trembled as Daniel reached for the back door. But before they could escape, a second voice, colder, sharper, spoke from outside. Don't run. Then came the sound of a gun being cocked. Emma's breath caught. They weren't just being watched, they were trapped. Emma's mind raced, every nerve in her body screaming at her to run, but the cold, mechanical click of the gun outside the door rooted her in place. Daniel's grip on her wrist tightened. His pulse beat fast against her skin, but his voice was deadly calm. We have to stay in control. She swallowed hard. We're surrounded, aren't we? Daniel didn't answer. He didn't have to. A third knock, this time softer, almost patient. Daniel. Victor's voice was smooth, even pleasant. You know me well enough to understand that I don't like waiting. Open the door and let's talk. Or would you rather I invite myself in? Emma shot Daniel a panicked look. His jaw clenched, his mind clearly calculating. They could try to escape, but if Victor had men stationed at every exit, there would be no running. Daniel exhaled through his nose, then released her wrist. He turned toward the door, straightening his posture as if preparing for battle. We don't have a choice, he murmured. Follow my lead. Emma felt a lump form in her throat, but she nodded. Daniel stepped forward and unlocked the door. He hesitated for a fraction of a second before pulling it open. Victor Raines stood on their doorstep, framed by the pale morning light. He was older than Emma expected, early 50s maybe, but power radiated from him in a way that made him seem timeless. His suit was crisp, his salt and pepper hair immaculately styled, but it was his eyes that unnerved her. Cold, assessing. The kind of eyes that had seen men beg for their lives and felt nothing. Behind him, two men in dark suits flanked the doorway, both armed, both unreadable. Victor tilted his head, his sharp gaze sweeping over Emma before settling, back on Daniel. A slow smile crept across his face. Well, he said, stepping inside uninvited. Let's have a chat. Victor moved through their home like he owned it, his fingers grazing the back of a dining chair before pulling it out and settling in like a guest who had been expected. His men remained by the door, silent and unmoving. Emma hovered near the kitchen counter, her hands gripping the edge to keep them from trembling. Daniel didn't sit. How did you find us? He asked, his voice deceptively calm. Victor chuckled, shaking his head as if amused by the question. Daniel. You don't really think you've ever been out of my sight, do you? Emma felt Daniel tense beside her. Victor leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. I've been patient with you. I let you play house. Let you pretend. You were free, but you took something from me. His gaze flicked to Emma. And now you've involved your lovely wife. Emma's skin crawled. I didn't ask to be involved. Victor's smile widened. Ah, but you were always involved, my dear. Daniel made sure of that the moment he married you. A heavy silence fell between them. Emma glanced at Daniel, searching his face for answers, but his expression remained blank. A lawyer's mask. Victor sighed as if he were dealing with a pair of unruly children. Let's not waste time. You have something that belongs to me. He leaned back, his fingers tapping the arm of the chair. The file. Daniel didn't move. And if I say no? Victor's smile faded. His next words were soft, but they sliced through the air like a blade. Then I take something from you. Emma's stomach dropped. The implied threat slithered over her, skin like a cold hand. Daniel's jaw tightened, but he didn't look at her. You won't kill us. Not yet. Victor's brow lifted. Won't I? Daniel inhaled sharply. Not until you have the file, and that means you need me alive. Victor studied him for a long moment. Then he let out a slow, measured laugh. "You always were a smart one," he admitted. "But let's be clear. I don't need both of you alive." Emma stiffened. Victor turned his gaze back to her, his smile returning. "Tell me, Emma, have you ever seen a man die?" Her throat went dry. Victor tilted his head. "Because I can arrange for that to be your last memory of your husband. Unless, of course, you convince him to give me what I want." The room felt like it. Was closing in, the walls pressing tighter, the air thinner. Emma's hands curled into fists. She wanted to scream, wanted to fight, but she couldn't. Not yet. Not until she knew what Daniel was planning, because she knew him, and she knew he wouldn't have let it come to this without a plan, would he? Daniel's silence stretched a second too long, and Emma's stomach twisted with fear. He always had a plan. Always. But this time, she couldn't tell if he was stalling or genuinely cornered. Victor sighed, his patience wearing thin. "Daniel, don't make me do something unpleasant." He gestured subtly to one of his men. The taller of the two, broad-shouldered, expressionless, stepped forward, reaching into his jacket. Emma's pulse spiked. "Wait!" she blurted, her voice sharper than she intended. Victor's eyebrows lifted, in amusement. "Yes, dear?" Emma took a steadying breath, forcing herself to meet his gaze. "You want the file. You said Daniel has it. But what if I do?" Daniel's head snapped toward her. "Emma!" She ignored him. She couldn't afford hesitation. "You're assuming he's the only one who knows where it is." Victor studied her, intrigued. "Go on." Emma swallowed hard. "If you kill him, you lose your leverage, but I don't trust you not to kill us both the second you get what you want. So let's make a deal." Daniel's muscles tensed beside her, but he didn't interrupt. His eyes burned into her, but she kept her focus on Victor. Victor smiled, leaning back. "I do love a good negotiation. What do you propose?" Emma steadied her breathing. "I give you the location of the file, but only after Daniel and I walk out of here. Alive." Victor's amusement didn't fade, but something shifted behind his eyes. Interest. Calculation. "You're braver than I expected," he murmured. Then he tilted his head. "And what's stopping me from having my men rip this house apart and finding it myself?" Emma forced herself to smile. "Because I didn't hide it here." Silence. Victor's lips parted slightly, then he chuckled. "Well now, that's interesting." His gaze flicked to Daniel, whose expression was carefully blank. But Emma could feel the heat of his stare. She had thrown them both into deeper waters, and now they had no choice but to keep swimming. Victor exhaled, pushing back his chair. "You know, I was planning to kill you both, just for the inconvenience." Emma's spine stiffened, but, Victor continued, standing slowly, "I'm feeling generous, and your little gamble has me curious." He straightened his suit jacket, then turned to his men. "We're leaving." Emma's stomach tightened. "What?" Victor smiled at her, indulgent, like she was a child who had just performed a clever trick. "I'll give you 24 hours. He adjusted his cufflinks. "You bring me the file, or I start taking things from you. Permanently." Emma felt Daniel shift beside her, but she kept her chin high. "And if we try to run?" Victor's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Then I make an example out of you." The unspoken words curled in the air between them. "You, Daniel, or someone you love." Victor turned toward the door, his men following. But before he stepped outside, he glanced over his shoulder. "Oh," he added. "One last thing." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, sleek phone. He placed it on the counter and tapped it lightly. "Call this number when you're ready," he said. "But if I don't hear from you by tomorrow night," his smile sharpened, "I'll find you first." And with that, he was gone. The moment the door shut, Emma's knees buckled. Daniel caught her before she could fall, his grip firm but trembling. "What the hell was that?" he hissed, his voice low but urgent. Emma sucked in a sharp breath. "I bought us time." Daniel's jaw clenched. "You just painted a target on your back." She pulled away, straightening. "It was already there." His hands raked. Through his hair, his breathing uneven. "Emma, tell me you don't actually have the file." She hesitated, just for a second. Daniel's eyes darkened. "Emma, I don't," she admitted. "But Ava might." His expression shifted. "Ava?" Emma swallowed hard. She knew too much, right? Maybe she knew about the file all along. Maybe she has it. Daniel stared at her, his mind working through the possibility. Then finally, he nodded. "Then we find Ava," he said. Emma exhaled. "And we end this." Neither of them said what they were both thinking. If they failed, there wouldn't be a second chance. The house felt suffocating in the silence that followed. Emma's hands shook as she reached for the counter, steadying herself. She could still feel Victor's presence in the room, like the scent of cologne that lingered long after its wearer had left. Daniel paced beside her, one hand on his hip, the other rubbing the back of his neck. "Ava's our only lead," he muttered. "If she has the file, we might have a way out." Emma swallowed. "And if she doesn't?" Daniel's jaw clenched. "Then we're dead." It wasn't an exaggeration. Victor had given them 24 hours, but he wouldn't hesitate if they failed to deliver. Emma forced herself to breathe. "Where do we start?" Daniel didn't answer immediately. His mind was working through possibilities, calculating risks. Then finally, he stopped pacing and turned to her. "Ava had a safe house," he said. "She mentioned it once. A place she kept off the grid in case things went bad." Emma's pulse quickened. "Do you know where it is?" "A general area. South side, near the docks. But finding her won't be easy." Emma tightened her arms around herself. "We don't have a choice." Daniel nodded, but his eyes darkened. "We're not the only ones looking for her. If Victor gets to her first." He didn't finish. He didn't need to. They moved quickly. Emma grabbed a backpack, stuffing it with whatever cash they had stashed around the house, an old habit of Daniel's she had never questioned before. No credit cards, no electronics, nothing that could be traced. As they packed, Emma caught Daniel glancing at her, his expression unreadable. "You were willing to risk everything back there," he said quietly. "To bluff Victor." Emma zipped up the bag. "You would have done the same for me." A muscle in his jaw twitched. "Yeah," he admitted. "I would." She didn't know what to do with the way he looked at her then, like she was something both fragile and dangerous all at once. Instead, she slung the bag over her shoulder. "Let's go." The drive to the south side was quiet. The streets felt different at night, hushed but tense, the kind of silence that suggested people knew when to keep their heads down. Daniel parked in an alley near the docks. The air smelled of salt and oil, thick with the weight of the city's underbelly. "She said it was a warehouse," he murmured. "Something abandoned." Emma scanned the darkened buildings, her stomach knotting. This could take all night. Daniel checked his watch. "We don't have all night." They moved cautiously, sticking to the shadows. Every step felt like an invitation to disaster, every turn a trap waiting to spring. Then, finally, "There," Emma whispered, pointing. A single warehouse, smaller than the others, tucked between two rusting cargo containers. No lights, no movement, but the door was slightly ajar. Daniel exhaled sharply. "Either she's here, or someone got here first," Emma finished. A chill ran down her spine. They had no choice. Daniel reached for the handle and pushed the door open. The darkness inside swallowed them whole.